My dental practice partner told me someone had to keep the business profitable when I confronted him about $125,000 in fraudulent insurance claims he had submitted during my 3-month volunteer commitment treating cancer patients. My name is Vincent Palmer, 46 years old, periodontist with 19 years of specialized practice in advanced gum disease treatment and oral cancer care. I had built Palmer & Sullivan Periodontics through meticulous patient care documentation and rigorous insurance compliance protocols that protected both our practice and our patients from billing errors and regulatory violations. When Michael Sullivan explained that my medical center volunteer work had created financial pressures requiring creative billing solutions, I simply said, "I understand the challenges of maintaining practice revenue during my absence." What Sullivan didn't realize was that my systematic approach to patient care documentation included automated treatment tracking systems that recorded every legitimate procedure, creating comprehensive evidence that would expose his systematic insurance fraud scheme affecting over 200 patient accounts. The confrontation took place in our practice office on a Thursday evening, 2 weeks after I had returned from my volunteer commitment at Phoenix Regional Medical Center's oncology unit. I had been reviewing quarterly billing reports when I noticed significant discrepancies between documented procedures and insurance claim submissions. "Vincent, while you were providing free care to cancer patients, our practice expenses continued accumulating," Sullivan explained while reviewing printed billing statements. "The medical center volunteer work was admirable, but someone had to ensure our financial survival." I maintained professional composure while noting the defensive tone in Sullivan's explanation and the unusual volume of insurance claims submitted during my 3-month absence. "Which specific procedures generated the increased billing volume?" I asked while cross-referencing our patient appointment records with the insurance claim documentation. Sullivan gathered his paperwork with visible irritation. "Vincent, complex periodontal procedures often require multiple billing codes and treatment phases that might not be immediately obvious from basic appointment scheduling." The response was evasive and contradicted the systematic documentation protocols we had established for all patient treatments throughout our 12-year partnership. "I see. Can you walk me through the documentation for Mrs. Henderson's scaling and root planing procedures that were billed in February?" Sullivan paused his review and looked up with slight frustration. "Vincent, you've been focused on volunteer cancer treatment while I've been managing the business aspects of our practice. These billing decisions were necessary to maintain operational viability." I thanked Sullivan for managing practice operations during my medical center commitment and returned to my office to begin systematic review of all billing activity during my volunteer period. The automated patient management system I had implemented for treatment tracking and compliance documentation had been recording every appointment, procedure, and billing submission throughout our practice operations. What I discovered during the first hour of analysis was sufficient evidence to contact my healthcare compliance attorney, Jennifer Morrison, for immediate consultation about fraud reporting obligations. The electronic records showed that Sullivan had been systematically submitting insurance claims for periodontal procedures that were never performed, using patient appointment slots when I was treating cancer patients at the medical center. "Jennifer, I need urgent consultation about systematic insurance fraud by my practice partner," I explained during our confidential phone call. "The documentation shows claims for procedures that couldn't have been performed because I was the only periodontist available during the contested period." Jennifer had handled healthcare compliance issues throughout her career and immediately recognized the seriousness of systematic insurance fraud in dental practice settings. "Vincent, if Sullivan submitted false claims for procedures that were never performed, you're looking at healthcare fraud violations that carry both civil and criminal penalties," she explained. "The evidence I was compiling showed not just billing errors or documentation mistakes, but deliberate submission of fraudulent insurance claims designed to generate revenue during my absence." Sullivan had been creating false procedure documentation and submitting insurance claims for complex periodontal treatments that required my specialized expertise and could not have been performed by general dental staff. Sullivan claimed payment for surgical periodontal procedures during periods when I was documented as treating cancer patients at the medical center, I noted. The timeline proves these procedures could not have been legitimately performed. The systematic nature of Sullivan's fraud suggested months of planning, rather than spontaneous opportunistic billing errors during my volunteer commitment. Jennifer reviewed my preliminary evidence and immediately recommended comprehensive documentation preservation and potential state regulatory notification. Vincent, the State Dental Board has mandatory reporting requirements for suspected insurance fraud, Jennifer advised. Your systematic documentation provides comprehensive evidence for regulatory investigation. The patient appointment records I maintained showed that Sullivan had been using my scheduled medical center volunteer time to submit fraudulent periodontal treatment claims across multiple insurance providers. Sullivan's fraud affected patients with different insurance carriers, suggesting systematic billing fraud rather than isolated incidents, I documented. The evidence was revealing systematic insurance fraud that violated both state dental practice regulations and federal healthcare fraud statutes that could result in criminal prosecution. Have you ever discovered that someone you trusted with your professional reputation was systematically committing fraud while you were providing charitable medical care? Healthcare fraud violations carry severe consequences that extend far beyond financial penalties to include potential imprisonment and professional license revocation. My 19-year career in periodontics had been built on the foundation of comprehensive patient care and systematic compliance with healthcare regulations that protected both patients and practitioners from billing fraud and regulatory violations. The specialized practice I had developed, Palmer & Sullivan Periodontics, represented years of advanced training in gum disease treatment and oral cancer care that served patients with complex medical conditions requiring expert periodontal intervention. I had established my periodontal specialty practice in 2005 after completing residency training at the University of Arizona College of Dentistry, where I had specialized in advanced surgical techniques for treating severe periodontitis and oral cancer-related gum disease. Dr. Palmer's expertise in complex periodontal surgery and cancer patient care provides specialized treatment that general dentists cannot offer, noted referral testimonial from oncologist Dr. Sarah Chen at Phoenix Regional Medical Center. The patient care protocols I had developed emphasized comprehensive documentation and systematic treatment planning that ensured optimal outcomes while maintaining strict compliance with insurance billing regulations and state dental practice standards. Vincent's systematic approach to patient care and billing compliance provides security and trust that allows patients to focus on healing rather than worrying about treatment documentation or insurance issues, explained long-term patient testimonial from periodontitis treatment recipient Robert Martinez. The 3-month volunteer commitment that had precipitated Sullivan's fraud scheme reflected my long-standing dedication to providing specialized periodontal care for cancer patients who often couldn't afford complex gum disease treatment during their medical care. Dr. Palmer's volunteer work with our oncology patients provides essential periodontal care that supports overall cancer treatment success, Phoenix Regional Medical Center Chief of Oncology, Dr. Jennifer Walsh, had noted. Cancer patients frequently developed severe gum disease as a side effect of chemotherapy and radiation treatments, requiring specialized periodontal intervention that could significantly impact their overall health outcomes and quality of life. Periodontal health is critical for cancer patients because gum disease can create infection risks that complicate cancer treatment protocols, I had explained during medical center staff presentations. The volunteer commitment had required careful coordination with my practice schedule to ensure that existing patients continued receiving necessary periodontal care while I provided charitable treatment for cancer patients. Michael Sullivan had joined our partnership in 2012 when our practice was expanding beyond my individual capacity to serve the growing number of patients requiring specialized periodontal treatment throughout the Phoenix metropolitan area. Michael's general dentistry background and business management experience will complement your periodontal expertise, I had reasoned when establishing our partnership agreement. Sullivan brought solid clinical skills and claimed experience in dental practice management, though his attitudes toward patient documentation and insurance compliance had always created some tension within our systematic approach to regulatory adherence. "Vincent, your documentation requirements are excessive and create unnecessary administrative burdens that slow down patient throughput," Sullivan had complained regularly. I had consistently explained that comprehensive documentation was essential for both optimal patient care and regulatory compliance that protected our practice from billing fraud allegations. "Michael, periodontal patients often have complex medical histories and insurance coverage that requires detailed documentation to ensure proper treatment and legitimate billing," I would respond. But Sullivan viewed systematic documentation as obstacles to practice efficiency rather than essential protection for both patients and practitioners in the heavily regulated healthcare environment. "Detailed documentation requirements limit our ability to maximize appointment scheduling and revenue optimization," Sullivan had argued during practice management discussions. The philosophical differences between Sullivan and my approach had been manageable when I maintained direct oversight of all billing and compliance activities. But my medical center volunteer commitment had apparently provided Sullivan with the opportunity he had been seeking to circumvent our established protocols. The patient management system I had implemented included automated tracking of all appointments, procedures, and billing submissions to ensure comprehensive documentation and regulatory compliance. Our electronic health record system documents every patient interaction and treatment decision for optimal care coordination and billing accuracy, I had explained to Sullivan during system implementation. The automated documentation was designed to prevent billing errors and ensure that insurance claims accurately reflected legitimate treatments that had been properly performed and documented. But Sullivan had apparently been exploiting the system's capabilities to generate fraudulent billing documentation while I was providing volunteer cancer patient care at the medical center. The specialized periodontal procedures that Sullivan had been billing required my personal involvement and expertise, making his fraudulent claims particularly egregious because they involved treatments that could not have been legitimately performed during my documented absence. Complex periodontal surgery requires specialized training and personal supervision that cannot be delegated to general dental staff, I had established as fundamental practice policy. Sullivan's systematic submission of fraudulent periodontal procedure claims during my medical center volunteer work violated both our practice protocols and basic healthcare fraud regulations. The patient care documentation I maintained for my medical center volunteer work provided irrefutable evidence of my actual schedule and treatment activities during the period when Sullivan was submitting fraudulent insurance claims. My medical center volunteer schedule is comprehensively documented through hospital credentialing and patient care records, I noted. This documentation proves I could not have been performing the procedures Sullivan claimed for insurance reimbursement. The systematic nature of Sullivan's fraud was becoming apparent through the volume and timing of his fraudulent claims, which coincided precisely with my documented medical center volunteer commitment. Have you ever maintained professional documentation so comprehensive that it became essential evidence for exposing systematic fraud by a trusted partner? Healthcare compliance systems designed for patient protection sometimes become crucial tools for detecting and preventing insurance fraud schemes. The comprehensive analysis I conducted during my first week of fraud investigation revealed that Sullivan's insurance billing scheme was far more extensive and sophisticated than his initial explanation had suggested. His exploitation of my medical center volunteer commitment wasn't opportunistic billing manipulation, but a carefully planned fraud scheme that had been systematically extracting money from multiple insurance providers while I was providing charitable cancer patient care. My forensic review of patient records and billing documentation showed that Sullivan had been creating entirely fictitious treatment scenarios using real patient information, submitting insurance claims for complex periodontal procedures that required specialized training and could not have been performed by our general dental staff. Sullivan's fraudulent claims include surgical periodontal procedures that require board certification and specialized equipment that only I am qualified to operate, I documented. His billing submissions claimed payment for treatments that were impossible to perform during my documented medical center volunteer schedule. The sophistication of Sullivan's scheme included coordination with our office management systems to create false appointment records that would support his fraudulent insurance claims if subjected to routine auditing. Sullivan modified our electronic scheduling system to show phantom patient appointments during my medical center volunteer periods, I noted. His systematic documentation falsification was designed to create paper trails that would support fraudulent billing claims. But Sullivan had made critical errors that would expose his systematic fraud and provide overwhelming evidence for state dental board investigation and potential criminal prosecution. The medical center credentialing system that documented my volunteer work created independent verification of my schedule that contradicted Sullivan's fraudulent appointment records. My medical center volunteer schedule is independently documented through hospital systems that Sullivan could not access or modify, I compiled. This creates irrefutable evidence that the procedures he claimed were impossible to perform. The healthcare compliance attorney, Jennifer Morrison, reviewed my expanded evidence and immediately recognized the systematic nature of Sullivan's fraud and the potential for federal healthcare crime prosecution. Vincent, Sullivan's activities show classic patterns of systematic healthcare fraud that violate both state insurance regulations and federal healthcare crime statutes, Jennifer observed. The technical methods Sullivan had used to facilitate his insurance fraud included creating false patient treatment plans and submitting pre-authorization requests for procedures he never intended to perform. Sullivan obtained insurance pre-authorization for complex periodontal surgeries during periods when I was documented as providing volunteer cancer care, I documented. His systematic pre-authorization fraud proves deliberate intent to deceive insurance providers. The patient communication records revealed that Sullivan had been systematically avoiding patient contact during the periods when he was billing for fraudulent procedures to prevent patients from questioning treatments they never received. Sullivan's office management protocols during my volunteer period included instructions to minimize patient communication about treatment scheduling and billing, I noted. His systematic patient avoidance was designed to prevent fraud detection. Most concerning was Sullivan's access to detailed patient medical histories and insurance information that he had been exploiting to craft believable fraudulent treatment narratives. Sullivan used confidential patient medical information to create fraudulent treatment justifications that would appear legitimate to insurance reviewers, I documented. This information had allowed Sullivan to submit sophisticated insurance claims that addressed specific patient conditions and would be difficult for insurance companies to identify as fraudulent without detailed clinical review. Sullivan's fraudulent claims included medically appropriate treatment rationale based on legitimate patient conditions, I observed. His access to confidential patient information enabled sophisticated fraud that required clinical expertise to detect. The timeline analysis revealed that Sullivan's fraud had accelerated during my final month of medical center volunteer work, suggesting that he was attempting to maximize fraudulent billings before my return to regular practice oversight. Sullivan submitted 67% of his fraudulent claims during my final 4 weeks at the medical center, I calculated. His fraud timing indicates systematic planning to avoid detection upon my return. Jennifer recommended immediate notification to the state dental board and comprehensive evidence preservation to prevent Sullivan from destroying records or continuing fraudulent billing activities. Vincent, you have mandatory reporting obligations as a licensed dentist who has discovered systematic healthcare fraud, Jennifer explained. The state dental board requires immediate notification of suspected insurance billing violations. The regulatory reporting requirements were designed to protect both patients and the dental profession from systematic fraud that damages professional credibility and increases insurance costs for all healthcare providers. Healthcare fraud affects every dentist through increased malpractice insurance premiums and enhanced regulatory scrutiny, Jennifer noted. Your reporting helps protect the entire profession. The evidence preservation process required securing all electronic records, patient files, and billing documentation before Sullivan realized that his fraud had been discovered and might attempt to destroy incriminating evidence. "We need to preserve all evidence immediately while maintaining normal practice operations," Jennifer advised. Sullivan cannot be allowed to modify or destroy records that document his systematic fraud. The State Dental Board investigation would provide regulatory enforcement capabilities that could result in immediate practice sanctions, while federal healthcare fraud investigators built criminal cases. State board investigations proceed rapidly because healthcare fraud creates immediate public safety concerns, Jennifer explained. "Your comprehensive documentation will enable quick regulatory action." The systematic documentation I had maintained throughout our practice operations was providing overwhelming evidence that would expose Sullivan's fraud while protecting my professional reputation and patient care standards. "Your systematic approach to patient care documentation and billing compliance provides comprehensive protection against partnership fraud," Jennifer observed. Sullivan's exploitation of my charitable medical work was about to encounter systematic evidence and regulatory enforcement that would expose every aspect of his insurance fraud while ensuring appropriate accountability. Have you ever discovered that comprehensive healthcare documentation could expose systematic fraud that exploited your charitable professional activities? Sometimes clinical compliance systems become essential tools for protecting both patients and ethical practitioners from partnership fraud schemes. The State Dental Board investigation that Jennifer Morrison initiated on my behalf moved with remarkable efficiency due to the comprehensive evidence of Sullivan's systematic insurance fraud and the clear documentation that proved his claims were impossible to fulfill during my documented medical center volunteer commitment. State investigators recognized that Sullivan's activities represented serious healthcare fraud that warranted immediate regulatory intervention and potential criminal referral. Dr. Palmer's documentation provides the most comprehensive evidence of systematic dental insurance fraud that our office has encountered, State Dental Board Chief Investigator Robert Kim explained during our coordination meeting. Sullivan's documented billing submissions during Palmer's verified medical center volunteer work eliminate any possibility of legitimate treatment claims. The regulatory investigation strategy involved simultaneous examination of Sullivan's billing records, patient treatment documentation, and coordination with insurance providers who had been victimized by his fraudulent claim submissions. Sullivan's fraud affects multiple insurance carriers and potentially violates federal healthcare crime statutes that carry both civil and criminal penalties, Investigator Kim noted. The systematic nature of his billing manipulation justifies maximum regulatory enforcement. The subpoena authority that state investigators possessed allowed comprehensive examination of our practice's electronic health records, billing systems, and patient communication protocols that Sullivan had been manipulating. Regulatory subpoenas will secure all billing records, patient files, and electronic system logs that document Sullivan's systematic fraud, Kim explained. Meanwhile, I was providing additional evidence about the specialized nature of periodontal procedures that Sullivan had been billing fraudulently, demonstrating that these treatments required expertise and equipment that were unavailable during my medical center volunteer periods. Sullivan claimed insurance payment for surgical periodontal procedures that require specialized training, sterile surgical facilities, and post-operative patient monitoring, I documented. These treatments cannot be performed by general dental staff and require my personal involvement. The technical complexity of legitimate periodontal surgery was providing additional evidence that Sullivan's fraudulent claims represented impossible treatments rather than simple billing errors or documentation mistakes. Complex periodontal procedures require 2 to 4 hours of specialized surgical time plus comprehensive pre-operative planning and post-operative care, I explained to investigators. Sullivan's billing timeline claims impossible treatment volumes during periods when I was documented at the medical center. The patient communication analysis revealed that Sullivan had been systematically avoiding contact with patients whose accounts he had used for fraudulent billing to prevent them from questioning treatments they never received. Sullivan's office protocols during my volunteer period included instructions to defer patient communication about treatment scheduling and billing to prevent fraud detection, Investigator Kim noted. The insurance provider coordination was revealing that Sullivan's fraud extended beyond individual patient accounts to systematic manipulation of pre-authorization processes and treatment approval systems. Sullivan obtained insurance pre-authorization for periodontal surgeries that he never performed, creating systematic deception of insurance review processes, Kim reported. But the most damaging evidence was Sullivan's modification of our electronic health record systems to create false documentation that would support his fraudulent insurance claims. Sullivan systematically falsified patient appointment records and treatment documentation to create paper trails supporting fraudulent billing, Kim documented. The electronic system modifications proved deliberate intent to commit fraud rather than accidental billing errors or documentation mistakes. Sullivan's systematic falsification of electronic health records proves criminal intent and eliminates most defense strategies, Kim observed. The federal healthcare fraud investigation was triggered when state investigators discovered that Sullivan had also been submitting false Medicaid claims during my medical center volunteer period. Sullivan's Medicaid fraud creates federal jurisdiction for criminal prosecution under healthcare crime statutes, Federal Investigator Patricia Chambers explained. The FBI Healthcare Fraud Unit was coordinating with state investigators to build comprehensive criminal cases that would address both state regulatory violations and federal healthcare crime charges. Sullivan's systematic fraud creates federal criminal exposure that includes healthcare fraud, wire fraud, and conspiracy charges, Chambers noted. The patient impact analysis revealed that Sullivan's fraud had affected over 200 patient accounts across multiple insurance providers, creating systematic billing manipulation that damaged both patients and insurance systems. Sullivan's fraud created false treatment histories for patients who may face insurance coverage complications for legitimate future periodontal care, I documented. The regulatory investigation was also examining whether Sullivan's fraud had created patient safety risks through false documentation of treatments that patients might believe they had received. Patients who believe they received periodontal treatment that was never performed may delay seeking necessary care, Investigator Kim noted. Sullivan's response to the state investigation revealed his growing recognition that his systematic fraud had been comprehensively documented and would be impossible to defend through legitimate explanations. Sullivan has hired criminal defense attorneys specializing in healthcare fraud rather than dental malpractice counsel, Jennifer observed. His legal strategy indicates recognition of criminal exposure. The criminal defense team that Sullivan assembled included specialists in federal healthcare crime and white-collar fraud, indicating his understanding that federal prosecutors were building serious criminal cases. Sullivan's legal team specializes in healthcare fraud defense, Chambers noted. His attorney selection proves he understands the criminal implications of his systematic insurance fraud. But Sullivan's criminal exposure was expanding beyond simple billing fraud to include conspiracy, wire fraud, and potentially racketeering charges based on his systematic coordination with office staff and electronic system manipulation. Sullivan's systematic fraud involves multiple elements and interstate communications that create enhanced federal criminal liability, Prosecutor Michael Rodriguez explained. The comprehensive evidence I had provided was supporting both state regulatory sanctions and federal criminal charges that could result in substantial prison time plus complete restitution of stolen insurance payments. Sullivan's documented activities support criminal charges that carry combined penalties exceeding 15 years in federal prison, Prosecutor Rodriguez noted. Have you ever provided evidence that supported simultaneous state regulatory and federal criminal enforcement actions against systematic healthcare fraud? Sometimes comprehensive clinical documentation enables investigators to build cases that address both immediate professional sanctions and long-term criminal accountability. The coordinated state and federal enforcement actions that began executing 10 weeks after my initial dental board complaint created immediate disruption to Sullivan's practice operations, while exposing the systematic nature of his insurance fraud to patients, regulatory bodies, and professional colleagues who had been unaware of his billing manipulation schemes during my medical center volunteer work. The regulatory sanctions and criminal investigation proceeded simultaneously, creating comprehensive pressure that eliminated Sullivan's ability to continue fraudulent billing while building criminal accountability. The State Dental Board emergency suspension of Sullivan's license immediately prevented him from continuing dental practice operations, while investigators completed comprehensive review of his fraudulent billing activities. Dr. Sullivan's dental license has been immediately suspended, pending investigation of systematic insurance fraud, State Dental Board Director Sarah Wilson announced. His documented billing violations during Dr. Palmer's verified medical center volunteer work warrant immediate protective measures. Sullivan's response to the license suspension revealed the extent to which his personal and professional planning had depended on continued access to practice revenue and insurance billing capabilities. Sullivan's emergency legal motions show panic about suspended practice operations and lost billing revenue, Jennifer Morrison observed. His financial strategy was built on continued access to fraudulent billing opportunities. The patient notification process required careful communication about Sullivan's license suspension while ensuring that affected patients understood their treatment options and billing rights. All patients who received care from Dr. Sullivan during Dr. Palmer's medical center volunteer period will be contacted for treatment verification and billing review, Board Investigator Kim announced. The patient response was overwhelmingly supportive of my ethical handling of Sullivan's fraud discovery and regulatory reporting obligations. Dr. Palmer's transparent communication about Dr. Sullivan's billing fraud demonstrates exactly the kind of professional integrity we need from our healthcare providers, noted patient testimonial from longtime periodontal care recipient Dorothy Martinez. But the most significant development was the federal healthcare fraud investigation expansion that revealed Sullivan's systematic billing manipulation extended beyond my practice to previous employment relationships. Sullivan's pattern of systematic insurance fraud extends back at least 5 years across multiple dental practice affiliations, FBI investigator Patricia Chambers reported. Your case provided the evidentiary foundation that allowed us to identify similar fraud patterns at his previous positions. The federal investigation was revealing that Sullivan had been systematically exploiting temporary coverage arrangements and practice management responsibilities to submit fraudulent insurance claims throughout his career. Sullivan targets practices where he can gain temporary billing authority during owner absences or coverage arrangements, Chambers noted. His methods are sophisticated and indicate professional criminal activity. The criminal charges that Sullivan faced included healthcare fraud, wire fraud, conspiracy and systematic deception of federal healthcare programs that carried potential sentences exceeding 20 years in federal prison. Each fraudulent insurance claim constitutes a separate criminal count, federal prosecutor Michael Rodriguez explained. Sullivan faces potential charges on over 200 individual billing fraud violations. Sullivan's attempts to hire experienced healthcare fraud defense attorneys were complicated by asset freezing orders that had secured his personal accounts pending restitution calculations. Sullivan cannot access funds for criminal defense representation because his assets are presumptively derived from healthcare fraud, asset recovery specialist Linda Thompson noted. The court appointed federal public defenders to represent Sullivan, but their initial case review revealed evidence so overwhelming that plea negotiations became their immediate strategy. The documentary evidence against Sullivan eliminates any possibility of successful defense at trial, Public Defender Jennifer Hayes stated. Our focus must be on cooperation and minimizing criminal exposure through complete restitution. But Sullivan's emotional breakdown during federal interrogation revealed the psychological pressure of systematic fraud and the recognition that his criminal activities would result in personal and professional destruction. Sullivan broke down completely when federal investigators presented evidence of his systematic billing fraud, Chambers reported. His emotional collapse included admission of fraudulent intent and recognition of criminal liability. The confession provided federal investigators with comprehensive details about Sullivan's fraud methods and identification of additional victims across multiple practice affiliations. Sullivan's cooperation has revealed systematic healthcare fraud affecting practices throughout Arizona and New Mexico, Rodriguez noted. His confession provides evidence for prosecuting additional healthcare crime cases. The asset recovery process was identifying fraudulent billing proceeds that Sullivan had used for personal investments and luxury purchases during his systematic insurance fraud activities. Sullivan's personal assets include real estate, vehicles, and investment accounts that were acquired using fraudulent insurance billing proceeds, Thompson calculated. The total recovery amount was approaching $200,000 when enhanced penalties and interest calculations were included in restitution requirements. Sullivan's restitution obligations include stolen insurance payments plus enhanced penalties for systematic healthcare fraud, Rodriguez explained. But the most meaningful outcome was comprehensive validation of my ethical reporting decision and systematic documentation methods that had exposed Sullivan's fraud while protecting patient interests. Dr. Palmer's systematic documentation and ethical reporting prevented additional fraud while ensuring appropriate accountability, State Board Director Wilson noted. The professional reputation protection that resulted from transparent fraud reporting was attracting new patients who valued ethical healthcare practices and comprehensive clinical documentation. We chose Dr. Palmer specifically because his handling of Dr. Sullivan's fraud demonstrated commitment to patient protection and professional integrity, noted new patient testimonial. The practice ownership transition was proceeding smoothly as regulatory investigations confirmed that Sullivan's fraudulent activities were conducted without my knowledge or participation. Dr. Palmer's comprehensive documentation and medical center volunteer schedule provide clear evidence that he was not involved in Dr. Sullivan's systematic fraud, Board Investigator Kim reported. Sullivan's systematic insurance fraud during my charitable medical work was about to result in comprehensive criminal accountability while validating ethical healthcare practices and systematic clinical documentation. Have you ever seen systematic healthcare fraud completely exposed through coordinated state and federal enforcement actions that established comprehensive accountability? Sometimes ethical reporting and comprehensive documentation create protection for entire healthcare professions while ensuring appropriate criminal prosecution. The comprehensive resolution of Sullivan's healthcare fraud case occurred within 8 months of my initial state board complaint, delivering complete practice ownership transition, enhanced professional reputation, and regulatory recognition that exceeded initial expectations while establishing industry standards for preventing dental practice fraud through systematic documentation and ethical reporting protocols. Sullivan's guilty plea on all federal charges included systematic healthcare fraud, wire fraud, conspiracy, and violation of federal healthcare program integrity that resulted in an 8-year federal prison sentence plus complete restitution of fraudulent billing proceeds. Dr. Sullivan's systematic healthcare fraud represents a serious violation of patient trust and professional standards, Federal Judge Patricia Stevens stated during sentencing. His exploitation of Dr. Palmer's charitable medical work to steal insurance payments warrants maximum punishment under federal healthcare crime guidelines. The criminal conviction required Sullivan to forfeit all personal assets plus pay enhanced penalties that brought total victim restitution to $185,000. Significantly exceeding the original fraudulent billing amounts. Sullivan's enhanced penalties reflect the systematic nature of his fraud and the need to deter similar healthcare billing crimes, Prosecutor Rodriguez explained. The comprehensive restitution ensures complete insurance provider recovery, plus damages for regulatory investigation costs. But beyond financial accountability, Sullivan's prosecution created industry recognition of systematic clinical documentation as essential protection against healthcare fraud and partnership exploitation. Palmer's comprehensive patient care documentation and volunteer work verification provided the evidentiary foundation for the most successful dental fraud prosecution in state history, State Board Director Wilson noted. His systematic approach to clinical compliance should be adopted by dental practices statewide. The professional opportunities that resulted from my ethical handling of Sullivan's fraud exceeded anything our original partnership could have provided. Palmer Periodontics, the independent practice I established using partnership dissolution proceeds, was attracting patients who valued ethical healthcare practices and comprehensive clinical documentation standards. Dr. Palmer's exposure of systematic healthcare fraud demonstrates exactly the kind of professional integrity we need for specialized periodontal care, noted patient testimonial from cancer treatment recipient Robert Chen. The periodontal practice was generating annual revenue of $420,000 while providing professional satisfaction that focused on advanced clinical care rather than partnership management and fraud prevention. Independent practice allows complete control over clinical protocols and ethical standards, I reflected, during professional development presentations. The former practice patients who remained with Palmer Periodontics represented validation that my clinical expertise and ethical standards created more value than Sullivan's cost-cutting schemes and fraudulent billing practices. Dr. Palmer's systematic approach to patient care and ethical business practices provides security and trust that justify premium periodontal fees, explained patient retention metrics showing 95% of major practice relationships continuing through the partnership dissolution. The speaking opportunities at dental ethics conferences and healthcare compliance seminars were generating additional revenue while establishing my reputation as an expert in practice fraud prevention and systematic clinical documentation. Palmer's experience demonstrates how comprehensive documentation systems can expose and prevent systematic healthcare fraud, observed conference organizer David Martinez. The State Dental Board had implemented enhanced oversight procedures based on recommendations from Sullivan's fraud investigation, creating industry standards for preventing systematic billing manipulation in dental practices. Palmer's compliance protocols have become model practices for dental offices seeking to prevent healthcare fraud and ensure regulatory compliance, Board Compliance Specialist Jennifer Adams noted. Sullivan's complete professional destruction served as industry-wide warning about the consequences of systematic healthcare fraud and the importance of ethical billing practices. The Sullivan prosecution sends clear messages throughout the dental community about state and federal enforcement capabilities for healthcare fraud violations, legal analyst Patricia Newman observed. But the most meaningful outcome was validation of charitable medical work and systematic clinical documentation as complementary aspects of ethical healthcare practice. Sullivan's prosecution proves that charitable medical service and comprehensive compliance create sustainable competitive advantages, I observed during ethics workshops. The medical center recognition I received for my volunteer cancer patient care had generated additional referrals and professional opportunities that exceeded the financial benefits of partnership arrangements. Dr. Palmer's volunteer oncology work demonstrates clinical expertise and professional commitment that attracts the most challenging and rewarding periodontal cases, Phoenix Regional Medical Center Chief of Staff Dr. Michael Torres noted. The technical expertise I had developed through cancer patient volunteer work was providing specialized capabilities that justified premium pricing and attracted referrals from oncologists throughout the Southwest. Palmer's experience with cancer-related periodontal complications provides unique expertise that serves our most vulnerable patients, oncology referral metrics showed. The comprehensive legal victory had demonstrated that systematic clinical documentation and ethical reporting provided more reliable practice security than partnership arrangements based on convenience rather than shared professional standards. Professional competence and systematic compliance create practice opportunities that transcend individual partnership relationships, I noted during practice management seminars. Sullivan's systematic fraud during my charitable medical work had inadvertently created opportunities for enhanced practice independence, professional recognition, and meaningful clinical work that exceeded anything our original partnership could have achieved. Sometimes the most systematic professional betrayal creates catalysts for independent success and enhanced ethical standards, I reflected during professional development workshops. The documentation methods that had exposed Sullivan's healthcare fraud were being adopted by dental practices while generating ongoing consultation revenue and professional recognition. Palmer's clinical documentation protocols provide comprehensive protection against healthcare fraud while supporting optimal patient care, noted licensing agreement with Arizona Dental Association. Sullivan's attempt to exploit my charitable medical work for systematic insurance fraud had ultimately created opportunities for enhanced practice independence, professional leadership, and meaningful clinical work that exceeded anything traditional partnership arrangements could have provided. Have you ever discovered that systematic clinical documentation and ethical reporting could transform attempted healthcare fraud into opportunities for enhanced professional success and industry recognition? Sometimes comprehensive compliance systems become the foundation for practice independence that exceeds partnership benefits. Standing in my expanded periodontal facility, 18 months after Sullivan's conviction and imprisonment, I reflected on how his systematic insurance fraud during my charitable cancer patient work had inadvertently transformed my career from partnership management to industry leadership in dental ethics and healthcare compliance. Palmer Periodontics had grown to generate $580,000 in annual revenue, while serving patients who valued proven integrity and comprehensive clinical documentation above traditional dental practice marketing approaches. The 4,200-square-foot facility accommodated advanced periodontal surgery capabilities and comprehensive patient education resources that supported both routine gum disease treatment and complex oral cancer care that had become my clinical specialty through medical center volunteer work. Working with a periodontist who prioritizes systematic documentation and ethical billing practices provides security and trust that allows patients to focus on healing rather than worrying about insurance fraud or regulatory compliance, noted senior dental hygienist Sarah Wilson. The periodontal practice I had established was generating substantially higher income than my original partnership arrangement while providing professional satisfaction that focused on advanced clinical care and charitable medical work rather than fraud prevention and partnership disputes. Palmer Periodontics' systematic approach to patient care and ethical billing provides comprehensive protection against insurance fraud while delivering superior clinical outcomes. Patient testimonial from advanced periodontitis treatment recipient Jennifer Rodriguez noted. The practice ownership independence that had resulted from Sullivan's prosecution, combined with medical center volunteer recognition, had created professional opportunities that exceeded anything achievable through traditional partnership arrangements. Dr. Palmer's transformation from fraud victim to industry ethics leader demonstrates how systematic integrity and comprehensive documentation create lasting competitive advantages, Dental Practice Management Quarterly observed. But the most significant achievement was industry recognition that established me as the definitive expert in dental practice fraud prevention and systematic clinical documentation for periodontal specialties. Palmer's experience provides unique insights into preventing and detecting healthcare fraud that threatens both patient care and professional integrity, Dental Ethics Review noted. The State Dental Board had requested my participation in developing enhanced compliance standards and fraud prevention protocols that would protect dental practices from systematic billing manipulation. Palmer's documentation methods and fraud detection expertise provide essential guidance for strengthening dental practice oversight, State Board Ethics Committee Chair Robert Kim explained. Annual speaking engagements at dental conferences, healthcare compliance seminars, and professional ethics workshops were generating supplemental income of $85,000 while reinforcing my expertise in systematic documentation and ethical practice management. Palmer's systematic approach to clinical documentation and fraud prevention has become the industry standard for specialty dental practices, Southwest Dental Association President Michael Torres observed. Sullivan's 8-year federal prison sentence had concluded with complete forfeiture of assets, permanent loss of dental license, and ongoing restitution obligations that would continue throughout his incarceration period. Sullivan's systematic healthcare fraud resulted in the most comprehensive dental practice prosecution in federal court history, Federal Prosecutor Rodriguez noted. His case demonstrates that insurance billing fraud carries severe criminal consequences that cannot be avoided through sophisticated documentation manipulation. But Sullivan's prosecution had also created enhanced protection for dental industry billing integrity by establishing legal precedents that strengthened healthcare fraud enforcement and professional oversight capabilities. The Sullivan prosecution clarified federal enforcement capabilities for systematic healthcare fraud and established deterrent effects throughout the dental profession, legal analyst Jennifer Adams observed. The clinical documentation methodologies I had developed and refined through Sullivan's fraud exposure were generating licensing revenue from dental practices who needed proven compliance frameworks while ensuring proper implementation and ethical oversight. Palmer's compliance protocols provide comprehensive protection against healthcare fraud while supporting legitimate clinical operations and optimal patient care, noted licensing agreement with Regional Dental Practice Network. The professional reputation I had built through ethical crisis management was attracting strategic consultation opportunities with major dental organizations who valued demonstrated integrity and systematic compliance expertise. Palmer Periodontics' proven ethical standards and comprehensive documentation capabilities make them ideal consultants for complex compliance initiatives and fraud prevention programs, explained consulting agreement with Phoenix-based Dental Consortium. Looking back on Sullivan's systematic betrayal and attempted exploitation of my charitable medical work, I realized that his sophisticated insurance fraud had inadvertently created opportunities for professional growth, industry leadership, and clinical practice success that exceeded anything traditional partnership arrangements could have provided. Sometimes the most comprehensive healthcare fraud becomes the catalyst for professional development and industry recognition that transforms entire career trajectories, I observed during dental leadership conferences. The systematic documentation that had exposed Sullivan's billing violations was serving as the foundation for expanded consultation services that helped other dental professionals prevent healthcare fraud while maintaining ethical practice standards. Sullivan's fraud attempt validated the commercial value of systematic clinical compliance while creating legal precedents that enhanced industry-wide fraud prevention, I noted during professional development workshops. The comprehensive legal victory had demonstrated that systematic documentation and ethical reporting provided more reliable practice security than partnership relationships based on convenience rather than shared professional standards. Professional competence in systematic compliance and ethical clinical practice creates sustainable competitive advantages that transcend individual partnership arrangements or business management strategies, I explained during ethics presentations. Sullivan's attempt to exploit my charitable cancer patient work through systematic insurance fraud had ultimately strengthened my professional position while creating consultation opportunities and industry recognition that established Palmer Periodontics as the Southwest's leading advocate for ethical dental practice and comprehensive clinical documentation. The people who attempt to exploit others' charitable medical work through systematic fraud sometimes end up creating opportunities for their victims to achieve greater success through validated expertise and comprehensive ethical standards, I reflected during industry leadership seminars. The experience had proven that professional competence in systematic documentation and ethical healthcare practices could transform attempted insurance fraud into enhanced practice success and industry authority that exceeded original partnership compensation arrangements. Sullivan's systematic billing fraud had inadvertently provided the foundation for building industry leadership, professional recognition, and clinical practice expansion that represented the most successful and meaningful period in my 19-year periodontal career. Professional relationships built on systematic integrity and ethical standards prove more durable and valuable than partnerships based on convenient arrangements or business strategies that can be compromised through fraudulent activities. The dental practice that had emerged from Sullivan's attempted fraud was generating higher revenue, enhanced industry recognition, and more meaningful patient relationships than anything traditional partnership arrangements could have achieved. Have you discovered that systematic documentation and ethical healthcare practices can transform attempted insurance fraud into opportunities for professional growth and industry leadership? Sometimes the most sophisticated billing fraud becomes the foundation for building enhanced competitive advantages through validated integrity and comprehensive clinical excellence. If this story of systematic documentation and healthcare ethics resonated with you, please hit that subscribe button to Revenge Tales with Luke. Share your experiences with professional fraud and healthcare compliance in the comments below. Your story might help someone else who's facing similar challenges with systematic billing fraud and partnership exploitation. See you in our next story.